record to this. Okay, if you could all flip your cameras on, if you would, for me. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. I'm excited, as I always am, to host one of my dear friends, and tonight is no exception. He's like a brother to me, and
Trustee.
brought me to St. John's in 1996 when he was the athletic director at St. John's, and it's been great. Uh, not only a collaboration but a great friendship, and we've worked on a lot of great things together. And we'll talk about that. We first started in sports marketing together here in Chicago, and then it morphed into the athletic department at St. John's for many years. So I'm happy to have Ed Manetta with us. Ed, thanks for joining us tonight. Ed's
Thank you, Dom.
background is vast. He's been an athletic director at three different universities. DePaul University at 26 years old, which we'll talk about tonight, which is always amazes me. And then he was at St. John's University, obviously in New York, and then Manhattanville College in Westchester. So three of those colleges, and then has been in corporate, and certainly now he'll talk about his dealings in corporate as well. But Ed, if you could, and again, thank you. If you could start out with just a brief bio of your accomplishments and your experience, and then I'll hit you with a couple questions, and we can go from there.
Sure, sure. Thank you. First of all, it's an honor always to be here with you, Dom, and with your class. I think I got a couple of my students that I have in my classes that are part of your team here. Um, I started at St. John's. It's been in my family since 1963. My father was a professor there. My sisters, brothers-in-law went there, so it's been part of the Manetta family for many, many years. I was in the business school, then moved over to, a dual major with, it was then called athletic administration. We were the first class that graduated since, then that, of course, inherited the different names, and it is now sports management at St. John's. The good news is, as I always say, when we graduated, nobody knew what the heck we were, what this degree was, or anything else. So there were some opportunities out there. Now, everybody in the country has sports management, undergraduate, graduate. And I can tell you, St. John's recently has won an award, one of the highest rated, sports management programs, graduate, undergraduate in the country. So kudos to St. John's and Dr. Hedlund and his team. From St. John's, I went to work at Fordham University as a young assistant athletic director. My athletic director was also a football coach. So 2 o'clock every afternoon, he would leave and say, "Here are the keys. You got to run the place." And but it was good because I had a baptism by fire. So I would walk the Grand Concourse, selling tickets, selling sponsorships, then working with our sports information director. Back then, the average size of a staff, Division I staff, was probably about, I don't know, 15 people, 20 people. Now there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on the athletic staffs. And it was great. I mean, Fordham, we had some very good basketball programs at the end of my tenure, but it was a great way to learn about every sport and really to oversee every sport. And at the same time, learning the business of athletics, learning about sponsorship. And at that point, it was just the advent of when television was starting to come into play to be a major media partner with colleges and universities across the country. And it was also the beginning of the formation of many conferences, the Big East, the MAC, the Eastern Eight, which is now the Atlantic 10. So many of the conferences were all forming then as well. So as time was moving, we were moving with it too, getting educated, et cetera. Also, the advent of Title IX. So we got, learned that at a very young age. And then went to, as Don mentioned, DePaul University in Chicago. And had a nice run there as athletic director, working with the Hall of Fame coach Ray Meyer, and playing in a major arena out in Chicago called the Rosemont Horizon, which is now Allstate Arena. And we had it was just an exciting time because our programs were growing. I was adding women's sports, men's sports. Our basketball program was ranked in the top 10 every year. So it was a great learning experience. And that's when I really got my love for, working with large venues, working with sponsorships, working in television. And when I left DePaul, I went to work at Edelman Worldwide, which is where Dom and I met, and as their senior vice president for sports. And I also oversaw the U.S. domestic area, all of our sports marketing programs, with the help of a lot of people, believe me. And then from Edelman, I came back to St. John's, kind of a family thing. There was Coach Cornisecca, the president of the university. A lot of people wanted me to come back, which I did, and was here for 6 years. And then got back into the business side at an international agency called Hill and Knowlton, one of the largest in the world, and running the All-State Olympic program, which I did for several years. And then we morphed off into a more of a TV company. And then from there, we moved into another agency called Union Square, where we did a lot of major events. We did auto racing, we did Olympic events, we were involved with a lot of college football programs, we did a lot of television programs. So it was a great way to take the marketing side, the media side, and combine them together. Unfortunately, that company kind of played itself out, and I was then scooped up by Google YouTube, where I stayed until I started working at the opening of the Barclays Center. So I helped open the Barclays Center as I was the director of sports programming, and we opened it back with we had UCLA, we had Maryland, Kentucky, and we had all sorts of college basketball. We did a ton of boxing. We had the ACC tournament, the Atlantic 10 tournament, several first and second rounds of the NCAA, regionals of the NCAA. And I just got tired of the commute because I lived in Westchester. So then that's when a friend of mine said, "Hey, look, they're looking for kind of an interim person to help at Manhattanville. Would you be interested?" I said, "Sure, yeah, give it a shot. I'm still teaching." So I did that and then went back into the private sector where I am now. And not only teaching at St. John's, but started a high school sports management program, and then have merged a company with a music marketing company in which we're creating events for colleges and universities, Division One, around their NIL programs, helping them produce revenue through music and sports. So the things have not slowed down much.
Thanks, Jake and Macklin. Thanks for joining. If you could put your cameras on, Quinnell and Michaela, if you can too. I want to start out, Ed, and it always amazes me, and the students would be very interested in this. You were 26, and I know this story, right? You're working at Fordham, and you apply for this job, not thinking for 1 second that you're going to get it, right? And
Correct.
you go back and forth. Tell that quick story about how that all happened. And the reason why I want you to tell this story is you never know what's going to happen, right? It's somebody on the board of directors who takes a liking to you, or it's somebody who really strikes up a good rapport with you, and that winds up, being the tell-all to get the job.
Sure. Well, it kind of happened, it's like everything in life. Prior to that, after about 2 years, going into my third year, I had a conversation with my athletic director, and I said, "Look, I want to look at some other opportunities. I'm young, single, and if I have to relocate, I will." So he supported me 100%. He said, "Do you want to go to a big time football school?" And I said, "Well, I really love basketball, so I'm going to stay focused on basketball, but whatever comes along." So I did start interviewing at several places. One was one was Dartmouth University, prestigious Ivy League school, 32 sports. Middle of the pack in football and basketball at Dartmouth, and it was really more to focus on the business side. Where I would be an associate AD for business affairs, it was called back then. And it was a great interview. Everything was good, but I told them, like, when I went home, I thought about it. I mean, I just didn't want to live up in Hanover, Hampshire. So, in Hanover, where Dartmouth was. So, I mean, if I didn't ski, and it was there wasn't a lot to do up there. So then I had an interview with the University of Pennsylvania with Charlie Scott, who went on to be one of the premier ADs in the country. He went from Pennsylvania to Arizona State, et cetera. We stayed in touch over the years. Had a great interview, and everything was going terrific. And I finished second. But he said, it was really because somebody had more experience. I said, that's great, that's fine. Because I felt every interview you learn something, and this is something for you young people to listen to. When you go, whether you're internship interview, for a job interview, summer job, permanent job, every interview is a good one. Even if you walk out of there and you made 100 mistakes, because you're going to learn from that. So you're not going to repeat what you did last time, because you're going to say in your own mind, oh wow, I shouldn't do this. And don't worry about being nervous, your stomach, and knots or all that's part of the drill. I mean, it really is. Of course, now when I tell you my story, you're going to say, well, that's kind of counter to what you said. But it happened that when I did apply for the DePaul job, on the recommendation of one of the Jack Kaiser, who was then the athletic director at St. John's, I sent out, back then you typed the letter, you sent your resume, there was no email, no texting. You had to do everything. We put it in the mail with a stamp, send it out. And I got selected to meet with the search firm they had hired. Two of the greatest guys I ever met in my life, and stayed in contact with them for a long time. And they came to New York, and we had a great interview. And they said, hey, look, you impressed everybody, with your credentials, and this interview's been fantastic. There's a lot of people, obviously, because DePaul was a top program. And he said, so we're not sure what's going to happen. I mean, so I left the interview figuring, I'm there because they came to New York. They took me out to lunch. I went back and I told my FI, I said, well, it was great. We had great lunch. It was nice, but there's no way I'm getting this job. So then about a month later, I heard from the chairman of their search committee, Father Tom Croak. I'll never forget his name. And he called me and he said, listen, we would love to bring you out for an interview to Chicago. I said, oh, are you serious? Are you kidding? He goes, nope. He goes, you really impressed the search firm. So, okay. So free trip to Chicago. They put me up at the Palmer House there, and they took me to dinner at Shea Hall, which is that fancy restaurant if you ever watched the movie The Blues Brothers. And I had dinner there, and we, met the next day with the search committee and a couple of the coaches and a few others. And okay, that's fine. Get back on the plane, go home. About 4 days later, I get another call. Would you come back out? We'd like you to present, your vision of what you would do for the department. And I'm starting to get a little bit, at this point, I'm starting to get a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious, because, the first two times I wasn't nervous at all, because I just figured there's no way I'm getting this job. I mean, Herb Brooks had interviewed for the job, and he was the Olympic coach that took our team to the gold medal.
1980, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Miracle.
I mean,
Miracle.
and who's this guy from New York, assistant AD at Fordham. All right. So, yeah, then it started to get a little dicey. So, okay. So I prepared something and made my presentation. So then I go back, and then I get a call from Father Croak, who said, look, you are our recommended candidate. We want you to come out and meet with the president of the university. So, I just couldn't even respond to it when he first said that, because I hadn't really said anything to anybody. The only people who knew about it were, my colleagues at Fordham. And I said, there's just no way this is happening. I never even said anything to my family. And, then I really was a little bit nervous. So then I went out, met with the president, and we had a great meeting, and came back to New York. And within 24 hours, they offered me the job. So I moved to Chicago knowing one person, and made then a ton of friends. And of course, the rest is history. Me working with Dom and Edelman, and other things. So that was, yeah, that was the story. Very, very, it was unique to say the least.
And the reason I have you tell that story, and it always amazes me, is never think that you're not going to get something, or never think that you may not have impressed, because it doesn't matter your age. Sometimes it doesn't matter. You're in the right place at the right time.
Right.
I
Yep.
never thought I was going to go to New York. Never. Didn't want to leave. Love Chicago. Right. And Ed gets the job out at St. John's, and he said, I'm bringing you out to New York. Didn't want to go. I had a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. If I would have had teenagers, I would have never left. Wouldn't have done that to the kids, right? But I got young kids who don't know the difference. We go out there and have a 25-year career there. Why? Because I take a chance. Ed took a chance. Didn't have to go. Didn't like the other job, right in the Ivy League. But that's what I'm saying. When you guys interview, and we'll talk more about that as the semester goes on. You don't know. You present yourself, you sell yourself to the best of your abilities, but it could be a St. John's alum. It could be somebody you never know, who's there to pick up the ball and say, "Hey, I like this person. We want to bring him back
Yes.
or
And
her."
that's why networking internships are
Yeah.
very, very important. I mean, even way back when we had internships, I interned with the National Football League. And, that's how I think that's one of the reasons I got the Fordham job, because I had the honor and pleasure of meeting Mr. Wellington Mara, who's a Fordham alum, by the way, working at the NFL offices as really just kind of, helping in the legal area and the PR area. But back then, we had to shuttle papers back and forth. I remember they put me on a plane to Washington, D.C. to take these papers down to the lawyer's office. And I went down. I just sat in their offices while they were reviewing them, signing them, then back on a plane to come back up to New York. They didn't even trust faxes back then. They wanted everything, delivered person to person. And Mr. Mara wrote my first letter of recommendation to Fordham University. And I never forget, his secretary typed it out, he signed it, and so the rest is history, as they say. So network, meet people, do your internships, and that everything you do is the experience that you really will always, like I said, I can remember those things like they were yesterday.
And I want to talk about communications. Obviously, this is the sports communications class. And when I got to St. John's, it really overwhelmed me the way that St. John's was covered by the press. And you and I have talked about this. In Chicago, yeah, there's a lot of buzz, of course, with our teams here, but not the onslaught of media that we had when I first started. So we had, just so you guys know in the class, we had all four newspapers. We had beat writers for all four newspapers: New York Times, Newsday, Daily News, and the New York Post. They traveled
Oh,
to
and
our games on the
Westchester
road.
Journal.
And the Westchester Journal, right? Five, right? So I had no idea how popular St. John's was in New York, and they are. We used to fight with Syracuse. They're New York's team. We're New York City's team, because they're upstate, whatever. But there's no question that St. John's has always been New York's team in the city, right? And I got a rude awakening my first couple of years, and I would go into Ed's office. I spent a ton of time in his office. Couldn't believe how they covered us. Talk about that. And when I came, you had just fired Brian Mahoney, who was a very popular coach, and I know a friend of yours, which is very difficult in your job, right, to do. But Coach Carnesecca had retired. Brian Mahoney was his hand-picked person through Mr. Kaiser, who you mentioned. And then Ed has to fire Brian Mahoney and hire Fran Fraschilla. And that was my first taste of it. Talk about that, Ed, how hard that was, number one, for you. And then the onslaught and the criticism when Fran Fraschilla was brought in and how we had to deal with that.
Well, yeah, it's like any, you have different ways that you deal with the media. To kind of bring it home, as or those of you who follow your New York sports teams know that, like, the president of the Knicks, Lon Rosen, doesn't talk to anybody, doesn't talk to the media, or James Dolan. They don't really care what anybody says about them. Then you've got others that are very sensitive to the media and criticism. In the old days, you didn't have 24-hour sports radio stations or TVs. Now you do. You have social media now as well. So there are a lot of challenges for anybody in a management role at any entity that has sports in it. In other words, if it's a pro team, college team, whatever it might be. So you have to find that balance between, working with the media, providing them the information you want them to have, but at the same time, you have to protect certain interests. You have to protect the brand of the university, individuals who may or may not be there anymore, et cetera. So, it's and it's the power of the press is the power of the press. They can say and do what they want, and you can only respond in a certain way. And it's like everything. When things are going well, the media is right there with you. Things aren't going so well, then there's constant criticism. What are you going to do? What's going to happen? All these other things. So, that's where that balance comes in. And, at times it becomes confrontational. And you just got to have a thick skin because it's part of the job.
Yeah, and it was, a couple of years into the job, we got to be very good. Coach Jarvis gets hired, Fran Fraschilla gets fired after 2 years, and we were on a real high. Went to the Elite Eight in 1999 with a great team with Ron Artest. You guys know him as Meta World Peace. You did a press release on him the first week, and that was talk about media and craziness leading up to the Elite Eight and, a 3-point basket away from going to the Final Four that year. But it was all great because it was all positive, but they were scrutinized 24/7. And we had meetings throughout the year. And this was Ed's real, challenge, not challenge, but he championed this, that we would bring the players in and go, look, this is when we're meeting with the media, no other times. Because just take the New York Post, it's a tabloid. They thought they had 24/7 access to the players. We couldn't do that because they had class, they had practices, the coaches were on us to stay on top of things, especially for my department in athletic communications. I reported to Ed and had to work with the coaches. So it was a fine line with the players. And those of you who were athletes or no athletes, you know the drill. We ran everything through the sports communications office. We had to. The torch had to go through us. Just because they were on campus and had classes with the students, it didn't matter. We had to run everything through us, and that was a great way for the players to be able to know when they were talking to the press, could concentrate on their studies and play. And it worked out really well. And to this day, I think they still do media training, Steve Dombrowski and his staff. But it was a big, big championing of that by Ed Manetta, who started that when we had to, because there was no other way. There were no rules before we got there. It was just kind of hit or miss, and we had to get a hold of that, wrap our arms around it. A couple other things, and then we'll open up for questions, Ed. Um, when we worked sports marketing, and this kind of ties back to communications, though, we hosted at Soldier Field here in Chicago the FIFA World Cup soccer opening ceremonies, which was unbelievable. When you guys think of the magnitude of the Super Bowl, I mean, this is on par with the Super Bowl worldwide. So imagine not 60,000 plus, I think Soldier Field held, but worldwide exposure, 700 credentialed media for that opening ceremony game. And we had a ton of volunteers helping me and our staff work on that. So when you see events, big events like that, they're always looking for volunteers, and you get that on your resume. But anyway, President Clinton, Bill Clinton was president at that time. Diana Ross sang the national anthem. It was crazy. And it was on the same day, look this up historically, that O.J. Simpson, right? The whole murder thing, and O.J. Simpson in the Ford Bronco. I mean, it was crazy, but it was after the game. We had left to go to a function, a banquet, and that was all over the airwaves. And we lost a lot of publicity, obviously, to OJ and the whole thing. But and talk about that too, the magnitude. You were a part of the Miracle, the 1980 team, and you represented those guys, years later. Talked about the magnitude of events like that, and especially from a communication standpoint, how crazy, but how unbelievably successful those can be, when you have your ducks in a row and you're organized.
Yeah, and you have to, and any of you who have the opportunity, you should volunteer. And I know in my class, I did pass on the information about if you want to sign up, volunteer for anything for World Cup. 60% or 65% of the volunteers in the 1994 games were either hired by the network, hired by FIFA, or hired by one of the sponsors. So that's quite a number. So if you do have the opportunity to volunteer and be part of World Cup coming this summer, you should do it because it's a great opportunity to, to interact, to network, and to be part of. It's a worldwide event. Remember, soccer outside of this country, it's the number one sport. So while we look at the Super Bowl as the Super Bowl, well, this is the Olympics, the Super Bowl of soccer, because it is the number one sport worldwide outside of the US. So, when we were hosting it, the communications was very key because, as Dom said, you had um, a lot of international media that you had to deal with. You had your own US media. You had the President of the United States there. You had celebrities there. And, so everything had to be coordinated. Plus, we were working for the state of Illinois, which was the host state, in Chicago, the host city for the World Cup. So we had responsibilities to the governor and to everybody in his office to to make sure everything went smooth. And it was, then of course the OJ Simpson thing happened, and there was an incident with Diana Ross. She couldn't get back into the press area because she didn't have the right credential. And
Yeah.
the president of the United States, you can't get near him no matter what. As one of the Secret Service agents said, you couldn't let Jesus Christ in because if they don't have the right credential. And that's just it. I mean, that's their job, and it's true. That's their job. And so we had to settle that whole problem. She got into a disagreement with the Secret Service agent. So, those are things that often come up. And that's why you have to be well coordinated, which we had a great team. And, we were in contact with everybody and, making sure everything went off flawlessly. And, but those, who would have known about OJ at that time and, who would have known about other things that happened. But you can't panic, you can't overreact. You just have to deal with the problem. And your expertise, your experience, all of that kicks in. And in later years, as Dom said, when I was running the All-State Olympic program for Hill and Knowlton, we brought together the 1980 gold winning U.S. team. Everybody remembers the history of that, right? Where we defeated the Russians actually in the semifinals, but we went on to win the gold medal. And we brought that team back together. It was the first time, this was 1992. So it had been the first time they had all been back together. No, what am I saying? 92, 2002. Because it was after the at the 2002 Winter Games in Salt Lake City, because nobody knew who was going to light the torch, and the entire team skated out with the torch to light the big torch there. And subsequently, we went to Los Angeles, where they were beginning to consult on the movie The Miracle that everybody I'm sure has seen over the years. At that same time, they worked with all of the hockey teams, their alumni groups, and we had an all-star. Besides the all regular all-star game, we had an all-star game. Former players from all the teams playing the Olympic team. It was the first and last time the whole group was together. 2 weeks later, Herb Brooks died, and subsequently, within a 6 to 8 month period, two of the other players had passed away. So it was just timing wise was incredible. But having the opportunity to have that team together. And in fact, we took Mike Ruzioni and Jim Craig, who were the co-captains of the 80 Olympic team, around the country. And we held clinics for underprivileged children. And we brought them to the local, to the NHL arena in their city, where they could go to an NHL game. They could go on between periods and shoot into the net and etc. So we had a whole activation program for Allstate around just this one Olympic program.
And yeah, it was unbelievable. And if you haven't seen Miracle, the movie, Kurt Russell does an unbelievable job playing Herb
Unbelievable
Brooks.
job.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a great
it was, and
great
we were
sports
there
movie.
covering that all in Los Angeles when it all came together.
And you're in the perfect spot, you students in New York. This weekend is the Ryder Cup,
Right.
and it's a world event. So again, at Bethpage Black, out on Long Island, but unbelievable, and that they've got hundreds. I'm sure close to 1,000 volunteers for the
Sure.
whole week of
Yep.
activities. So yeah, always look for that stuff, and we can help to Ed Manetta, myself, some of your professors, to get to people. But you got to look ahead, to what's coming up. Like Ed said, World Cup. You can go out of the country. I mean, you can go in state and go out there, and you can get paid for, working an unbelievable event like that. All right, one more question from me, Ed. We talked a little bit about some controversy, but the one thing that always stays with me, and again, this with Ed Edelman, and we've had a couple things at St. John's, but um, Bill Shoemaker was a horse racing legend. He was like the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James of horse racing. And we signed him on to be our spokesperson for a horse racing series called the Early Times Triple Turf Classic. It was a triple turf race on turf, right? The regular championship races for the Triple Crown are on dirt, right? So Ed
Hmm.
came up with and met with Kurt Gowdy Jr. at ABC to coordinate this because there were 6 hours of programming. They only had one race on ABC. So we presented with Ed, what about another race, another $1 million purse, and it's going to be on turf instead of dirt. They loved it. It was more programming that they could put on, another race that they could get interested in. So prior to the race happening is what was called the Breeders' Cup, which was, I believe, in the fall, Ed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We're in California.
Yeah.
So Bill Shoemaker comes, he presents. We do this whole thing about coming up in May, with the Triple Crown of dirt racing is the Triple Crown of turf. Bill Shoemaker, one day in between that time period, is out golfing. I think it was early spring, and was drinking. Comes back, and he's driving back, goes off the road, and gets into a tremendous crash, and is rendered quadriplegic for life after this crash. One of the most heartbreaking things that we really ever had to deal with, because now it's thrown back in our court, right? And obviously, early times people are like, well, it seems like he was drinking. We had to get all the information. Anyway, make a long story short, we recommend to early times, look, we have to be sympathetic. This man is paralyzed. Now, he may have erred in drinking and driving. We understand that, but we can't come out and fire him. And this is our recommendation to the client, Brown Forman Beverage Company in Kentucky. Do we fire him and show that we're callous about this and we don't care about his family and what happened to me? We had meeting upon meeting upon meeting. We finally convinced early times, and Ed talk about that. But I remember those
Yeah.
meetings like they were
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah.
To obviously to protect his family, and we did let him go. Because he couldn't perform what we needed him to do, responsibility wise. But talk about that and how hard that was. Rick Povil and some of the guys at Brown Forman that we dealt with.
Yes, and back then, distilled spirits, when I say distilled spirits, I mean alcohol, not beer, were not allowed to advertise on television as they are now. So we had to come up with a way to market the product, the brand, early times. So we had the jockeys dress in them, we had the bridles, everything was marked with early times. And of course, the title of the race was the Early Times Triple Turf. So ABC had to say that. So that was a great way to market for early times to a national, international audience. This, small brand, really part of the Brown Forum family because they have Southern Comfort and Jack Daniels and Corbel, some of their larger brands. This was really an opportunity for the brand to be exposed. And of course, having, Willie Shoemaker, who was, Hall of Fame, as Dom said, jockey, to be part of it. Now, the accident is you hear a lot of different stories. He had gotten up early to train his horses. I think he played 2 rounds of golf, 36 holes. He might have had 2 beers. Now, with all due respect, Willie Shoemaker's about 4 feet something. So probably didn't take a lot. So he fell asleep at the wheel, but they never really concluded if it was just he was tired or out, So it was very, very hard. And as Dom said, we met with we got on the plane that day when we heard about the accident and flew down there and met with them and just said, look, guys, you can't, there's no way that you can get around this. We have to take the high road. So what we told Brown Foreman, the executives, to say is that, that Willie Shoemaker was the spokesperson for the Early Times Triple Turf Classic. He was not a spokesperson for Brown Foreman or Early Times, the brand. So, communications lesson, we separated the two.
Yeah.
We kept the focus on the event, and most people wouldn't have even, okay, it's a turf race, it's a triple. Nobody would have associated. A lot of people didn't associate Early Times with distilled spirit and what happened with Willie Shoemaker. So, the advice was, okay, keep it separate. We keep him on. And then, of course, quietly, he would, kind of, for medical reasons, he would step aside as the spokesperson.
Yeah, and it was a very well thought out communications plan. And like Ed said, our office and our representatives were on a plane that day and met for a couple days down in Kentucky. But you have to be careful, because the message that's getting out there to the media, has to be accurate. You've got families involved. You've got, as we said, medical issues where, you know, I mean, it's a terrible story, but you have to deal with the questions and the onslaught. Now, we're not going to have a press conference and roll out Bill Shoemaker. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't put him in that situation. But our communications with the media was very strong, very to the point. We sympathized with the family, and we wished him the best. We didn't know, to the extent of the injuries at the time, but we did know that it was bad and it wasn't going to be anything, that he could ever come back from, unfortunately. But he lived a long life, and he
Yeah,
continued to train,
yeah,
which was wonderful. But and as Ed said, we didn't announce that we were releasing him, but it just kind of slowly as we got closer, he basically decided to step aside, which was the
for
right thing to
medical
do.
reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for medical
anything.
reasons.
Yeah.
So, but it was hard. And again, you're the communications person. I'm working with St. John's. I'm sorry, I'm working with Edelman Public Relations. The client is Brown Foreman, right? There is the agent for Bill Shoemaker, his representatives, the racing associates, all these people are involved,
Right.
right? But so you got to have, the right messaging going on. And we did a great job of brainstorming and coming up with those, several different communications. All right, enough hearing from me and Ed. You guys have Ed for the next 17 minutes. Let's hit him with a couple questions. What do you want to know about communications, being an athletic director, being in the sports industry? While we have him, he's got a wealth of experience, 40 plus years in the business. So let's hit him with some questions. Go ahead. Who's first, guys?
I can go first.
Go ahead, Killian.
So I'm currently an intern with the marketing department at athletics here at St. John. So I was wondering if you had any advice for me while I'm serving in this role.
Well, that's terrific, Killian, that you're doing that. I think there's a lot to learn, especially on the marketing side. And this way, you'll get an idea of what you might be interested in. Is it more on the sales side? Is it in the customer relations side? Do you want to even move into the ticket operations area? So you've got even in marketing, you've got a number of different ways you can go. Sponsorship sales, the TV or the media side or ticket side. I mean, just think about every venue, every major college university needs people in the marketing department, needs people in tickets, needs people in the sponsorship sales, because those are all revenue producers. So anything that drives revenue, or even if you got a taste for the NIL, so there's I would say learn as much as you can. Don't pigeonhole yourself in the sense that I just want to do this. But, if you just go on to the Oakview Group, which is one of our clients, OVG website, and just look at all the arenas that they run, 300 and 350 across the world. And I forget, 200 and some odd here in the United States. They all need people in marketing, ticketing, promotion. So, I mean, you've got a just a runway of opportunities for you. So I
Yeah.
would say that, what you like, do what you like. Now, and what year are you?
I'm a senior.
Okay, then you're on your way.
Yeah. Great question, Killiam. And Ed hit it right on the head. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Marketing and communications and advertising, to me, they're all one. Now, I'm a journalism major and I came up through PR, but my writing got me to do both PR and communications. So Ed's right. You may get in somewhere and, well, it's a sales job, but you really want to be in the marketing department or the communications department. But get into the organization, right? And then keep asking, hey, is there a job opening here or something while you're there? And then do a good job at whatever you're doing there, and you can move on to something else. And you'll always have a plan B. That's what it's all about. It really is. I never thought about public relations, didn't know anything about it.
Yep,
And I spent
right.
my whole career working in PR, because of my writing skills, because I wanted to be a sports writer. But it turned and it morphed into something else, and I really liked it. And don't be afraid to leave, and relocate too.
Yes,
Ed to New York or
I
went to
did it.
Chicago.
Yes, and
I'm
you're
in
going to have to
Chicago
do
and went
that.
to New York.
Yes,
You know,
there's probably better at 50-50 chance you're going to have to relocate if you want to, follow your dream or whatever it is.
and that's great if you're single, even if you don't know anybody there, even if if you do, wind up getting married and you make a decision like that. There's nothing wrong with it, and you can always come back home. That's the great thing about it. But when the positions present themselves, you got to jump on them and you can't be afraid. I think that's a great point. All right, great question, Killian. Good to start us off.
Thank
All right,
you.
who else? Come on, we got another 10 minutes or so. I know you guys want to see Mets Cubs tonight. Uh, Cubs in, Mets trying to get in. Craziness. Um, Anybody? Come on. While we got Ed, it's got to be some questions out there. Anybody interested in communications? Anybody interested in um, athletic opportunities in the athletic departments?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead,
This
Macklin.
this might be a silly question. But I'm just curious, like as an athletic director, what would be like a day in the life for you at university?
Well, I think the majority of your time is spent dealing with coaches. I would say that was probably the most in if you had to say you break up your day, you're dealing with, the coaches. Every coach has an issue, no matter what. And you have to give equal time to everybody, whether you're the premier sport, basketball or football. You have to give everybody, time to the team that has, makes the most money for the university to the team that doesn't. You have to give them the same amount of time. You have to be a good listener, a good leader, listens, takes advice, doesn't overreact, never comes on too strong like a dictator, because everybody's on the same team. So you spend time with that. Then you usually spend time dealing with the conference. What are the issues that your conference has? Back when I was athletic director, it was always, when are the football schools going to leave? Are they going to leave? Are they going to stay? Then you have to deal with the financial issues. Your associate athletic director for finance will come in and drop something on your desk that's, usually, well, we got to cut this, we got to cut that, we got to do this, we got to do that. All right. Then, of course, there's always, as Don will tell you, there's always a communications or media issue. So then Don would come in and we would talk about that. So the days go pretty quickly when you're dealing with all the different, uh, basically every unit within the athletic department. And then, of course, you have your own obligations as athletic director to the president's office. You have alumni commitments to speak to the alumni, visit with the alumni, fundraise. So there are those duties you have to do. So scheduling becomes a very, very big part of one's life.
Yeah.
And, this is because there are just so many stakeholders within, that you have, donors and everything else that you don't really, you've got to make sure. I used to kid around, say, I answer to everyone, including the field maintenance staff, because everybody wants a piece of you about something.
Yeah. And Ed brings up a great point. And it's no secret to you guys, we don't have football at St. John's, right? So men's basketball is king because they draw the most interest, they bring in the most revenue. But we have to make, the athletic people have to make the coaches feel like they're king too, or queens, right? So that's the hard part. We came up with some great creative things. I'll give you one example. Joanne Persico, our volleyball coach, great coach. They've won the Big East. They've had great success. I know that the media is not going to cover them, right? Night and day, like they do men's basketball. So, what we did? They used to practice on the beach at Jones Beach in New York. We used to have an ABC weather guy that would go out and he would do all these different stories. So we pitched, hey, the girls are going to be out at 6 o'clock in the morning practicing volleyball. You know what they did? They were on for 2 hours. We mic'd them up and they gave the weather for the week, right? Never going to get publicity like that normally, but we got to be creative, right? Later in the year, they had a great player from Hawaii who was the best player. I can't remember her name now. It
Oh
escapes me,
gosh,
but
yeah, right.
and we mic'd her up and did a Sunday night special, I think with Bruce Beck and of her being mic'd up in her final game, and she led the whole nation in assists, as a libero. So you got to be creative with stuff like that. Women's basketball certainly wants the same as men's basketball. So we try to do that. We try to, of course, pitch, and women's basketballs get much more popular. So we were able to do those things. But you got soccer. We had 17 sports.
Mhm.
Fencing. How do you get fencing publicity? How do you get, bowling publicity with a bowling team? So it's not easy. But it was a lot of fun for me because we could be creative doing those things. And Ed ran it like a family. So everybody was just as important. All our meetings with the coaches, were the same, and nobody was better than the other. They may think they are, but you know, it has to run that way for you to be successful. And those are some great times. Okay, one last question, and we'll get you guys out of here. Good question, Macklin. Justine, Annie,
Hey,
Jake,
This is
somebody
an athletic director question
go ahead,
related.
Justine. Yeah.
So like with the transfer portal and NIL now, like how is that gonna negatively affect how athletic departments run? Like what do you think?
Well, I think, Justine, that's a great question. I think it depends on who you ask. I think the transfer portal has really hurt the game. I'm sure Coach Pitino would disagree with me because he's been able to recruit some great players out of that. But as you've seen both on the football side of college sports and within the last 2 days with Bruce Pearl retiring,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was another coach that retired too. The old school guys are not, they don't want to deal with it. They liked it the old way where you recruit the best athletes and you get into the high schools, etc. So I think the transfer portal has definitely hurt, and it's going to create more of the, the kind of the haves and have-nots. Same thing with the NIL. I mean, the NIL. The problem was that is the NCAA got what they should have avoided years ago. I talked about it in my class 15, 20 years ago, that there had to be a way to compensate the student athletes. Whether it was a month, they used to give them monthly stipends, but that went more for their living expenses, and they couldn't work during the year when they were, when they were in season. Archaic rules. And I said, well, if you're going to take these young men and young women and halfway or all the way across the country, and then how are they going to get home for the holidays? How their parents going to see them? Yeah, and slowly but surely they made some adjustments, but what happened was they just didn't think this would ever happen. And the student athletes sued, they won from 2016 on, so there had to be a court settlement. So they have now, the university's got to pay back all those student athletes, name, image, and likeness. In addition, they have to put money aside now in their own NIL programs. Now, we are lucky that we have a benefactor that gives us a lot of money at St. John's for our NIL. And even the Big East Conference is finding itself in the haves and have-nots. So it might be St. John's and UConn and, hopefully Villanova and maybe Marquette and a few others, but then there's going to be 4 or 5 at the bottom that just aren't ever going to get there because they don't have the resources.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to determine, who is going to perennially be at the top. And that's why you saw 10 or 12 SEC schools last year in the NCAA tournament. And of course, then there's that whole issue. When are the Big Ten and the SEC going to say enough is enough? We're not splitting our money anymore with these guys. We're going to have our own NCAA tournament. It will take you ACC, we'll take you Big 12. Maybe we'll take 5 teams from the Big East, 3 teams from the A10, 1 or 2 other conferences, the AAC, something like that, and say, what, you guys are invited. The rest of you, mid-majors, everybody else, you have your own tournament. So, and that could happen because they did it with college football.
All right. Few more minutes. Jake, Annie, who else? Quinnell, Michaela. Last chance to ask Ed anything before we go. Anything else?
Thank you, Dom. I appreciate it. Thank you, students. Thank you for those who asked the questions too. It was a very productive session. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. I'll call you.
Be here tonight.
I'll call you later tonight. I just gonna keep the kids for a little bit. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good semester, all.
Thanks, Ed. Hold on 1 second, guys. Stay with me. So we've got 2 assignments to date, right? I've graded your press releases. You guys saw them on Canvas, right? That I got back to you with your comments. You can turn those in any other time, get a better grade, okay? You can turn it in 2, 3 times if you have to. Practice makes perfect with me. You guys are going to be writers when this is all over, or I'm going to quit my job at St. John's, all right? I promise you. Number 2 was the press conferences. All right, that's the second. And somebody noted this to me. I'll give you another week so you can turn that in at the end of this week for Sunday night, because I guess I had September 28th instead of 21st. So I opened it up again. You can go back in there. And that was giving me your critiques on those press conferences, the art of the press conference. All right. And look for an email from me on Monday for the next lesson plan and homework. Okay. And guys, Macklin, get some stuff in. I know you guys owe me some. Just get it in, even if it's late. I'm not gonna take a ton of points off. But I have to grade it late because you got to meet these deadlines. And I'm not singling you out, Macklin. I'm just saying I know that some of you came in late. You were having issues with some things or got into class late. So whoever's behind on their assignments, just get them in, and I'll grade them and I'll be fair. Okay. Anybody want to stay on and talk to me? You're more than welcome to. If not, thank you guys so much. We had 7. So to me, you guys took the time. You'll all get extra credit for this, which is very helpful because I don't want to embarrass ourselves as a class and not have a good turnout. So you guys made it special tonight. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. Thanks. Have a great night. Go Cubs. I don't want to see the Mets not get in because Ed's a good friend of mine. So we can both get in, the Mets and the Cubs. So it wouldn't kill me if they swept the Cubs this week. All right. Thanks, guys, and have a great night. Anybody need to talk to me, stay on.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Professor, I have a question about
Yes.
the press release.
Yeah, let me just stop the recording.